Issy Lepowski is a senior writer at Wired. She was on the phone call with Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, and she's here now. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So Zuckerberg is set to testify on the Hill. What was he hoping to accomplish with that call yesterday?
I think one of the biggest criticisms of Mark Zuckerberg and of Facebook is lack of transparency. They're always so cagey about how the platform works. Mark is very difficult to reach. And since this data privacy scandal really broke, he's been on this sort of apology tour. A couple weeks ago, he did interviews with a bunch of news outlets, including Wired. And then yesterday was really a chance to sort of, I think, introduce what he's going to say to Congress, to the press, to introduce these ideas. They announced a slew of new data privacy changes yesterday. And so he was trying to sort of justify them and answer some questions that Congress is likely to ask ahead of time. Maybe it's a little bit of a prep work for these.
Yeah, because he's not known to be the smoothest operator when he's asked a lot of questions. He's not always available. And I think that perhaps you've reported this as well, that lawmakers were like, don't send your policy guys, don't send your lawyers. We want you. We want the American people to, through us, ask you these questions that we think are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you send a lawyer, you're sending somebody who's not going to say the wrong thing.
Right.
And you're sending somebody who's going to answer just so they don't give away too much. But what Washington really wants to know, and I think what a lot of the public wants to know at this point is, isn't this all just a fundamental part of the way Facebook is structured? So we don't want to talk about the minute details of every little disaster along the last few months. We want to talk about, the fundamentals of Facebook and why it has always defaulted toward openness, and whether that is a smart way to approach the world when you have a platform of 2 billion people. Obviously, when you have 2 billion people, that's going to come with the good and the bad. And it's a little naive at this point to say, well, we didn't see the bad along the way.
Right. So now we understand that 87 million users may have been exposed. They had their data exposed. That's up from the 37 or 50 million that had been previously reported. What's the discrepancy? How did we miss that?
Sure. So 50 million was what was reported by the New York Times, The Guardian, and The Observer when they spoke with the whistleblower Chris Wiley, who had worked with Cambridge Analytica. So that was a number that Facebook is saying, look, that came from media reports. We waited to do our own analysis before we ever gave a solid number. Now, they never refuted the 50 million number. The number that they initially gave was 270,000 people had downloaded this app, this personality profiling app. And that's the app that leached all this information about people's friend networks. So they say now we have come up with our own analysis, and that analysis looks at how many maximum friends all of those people had. And if you take the maximum friend count, that equals 87 million.
So, Issy, how can we tell? I've been kind of curious if my data has been exposed through this. I don't do Farmville, Candy Crush, or anything. I just look at pictures of my friends' kids. But I wonder, how would I be able to find out if my data has been exposed?
Sure. So Facebook announced that starting April 9th, they're going to have a portal at the top of the news feed so that if your data was exposed to Cambridge Analytica, you will be able to find out right there. And that's, a step forward for Facebook, because in the past, for instance, their tool that told you if you followed a Russian troll, that was deeply hidden in their help section, very hard to find, and it was very much an opt-in thing. This time, they're really pushing it out to people. But I think what's important to note is that Cambridge Analytica, yes, it's a somewhat shady company. Obviously, they improperly accessed this data. But Facebook has no idea whether there were thousands of other app developers who did the same thing. So Cambridge Analytica has become sort of the convenient poster child. But just because your data maybe wasn't exposed as part of this Cambridge Analytica privacy breach, that doesn't mean that it wasn't exposed somewhere else.
Right. So let's talk about, Facebook has faced these questions time and time again. They faced them back in 2011. And each time they say, we're going to do better, we're going to clean it up. Are they sincere in those sentiments, or because why does this keep happening?
Right. I think this time they are sincere in that they're showing us that they're making changes today. So yesterday they announced that they are cutting off their API. That's what allows app developers to plug into Facebook. They're cutting off a lot of the access that app developers would have. So in the past, and you might know this from signing into apps on Facebook, when you log in, it will say, this app wants to access X number of data points. Well, now they're preventing those apps from accessing information like your religious beliefs, your political affiliation, your relationships, your work history, education, all that really personal information. No more. But they're also limiting access to, for instance, if you RSVP to an event. apps will no longer be able to see the guest list for the event or what people comment on the wall for that event. So they are making very deliberate changes now. As they make those changes to benefit the community, the app developer community is going to rise up because people have staked their businesses,
right,
and they're employing people built on the back of Facebook's APIs. So that's going to be a whole other conversation that Facebook is going to have to confront. Obviously, it has all of the power here and it has a lot of the motivation and public pressure, but app developers are certainly not going to be happy.
Well, I definitely still want to see the guest list, so I want to know if all the cool people are going and if I should go too.
Well, you'll be able to see that. You'll be able to see that, but some other person is going to be able to
the other third-party apps are not going to be able to spy on me. One
right.
last question, though, I always ask this question of technology reporters because I think it's important for it to be out there. Is it just because all of a sudden people are fired up over the 2016 election? There are a lot of people who have said, look, Facebook was, everything when Barack Obama was using it to campaign, when he was reaching out to young people, and his campaign was seen as forward-thinking because they were using all these different social media platforms. And I get that, and people understand that what Cambridge Analytica did was wrong. But is there a mix or a muddled message there when it comes to this?
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely fair point. This is the way Facebook has always operated. And I think for a long time people accepted that, or
right.
at least they ignored it or maybe weren't aware of it. But I do think we have to acknowledge that Facebook plays an increasingly large role. It's substantially bigger than it was
back
in 2012.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
They offered the Trump campaign and the Clinton campaign many more capabilities than were offered to any campaigns back in 2012. And we're also seeing a lot more misuse. We're seeing the rise of fake news. We're seeing
right.
how Facebook is, involved in, genocide in Myanmar. So
right.
you have to think about
That's exactly
all these
right.
negative consequences that continue to arise and reevaluate as you go.
That's a great point. Izzy Lepowski, always great to talk to you. Thank you very much.